If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall review the V5 Gargoyles, a homebrew for Vampire the Masquerade. I shall present my thoughts and opinions on its presentation and mechanics to help you better decide whether this is the sourcebook for you. If you have been following the Lore by Night podcast for some time, you will know that this is not the first time we have looked at homebrew material on the podcast. The first and previous one left quite the bitter taste in my mouth for a whole slew of reasons. Both it and future interactions with one of the authors made me feel very uncomfortable about taking on homebrew material again, on the off chance that folks didn't respond nicely to honestly negative criticism. Then I remembered unapologetic honesty is one's brand, and if all folks want sunshine and rainbows, pretending things are perfect, they can go elsewhere. Mini rant aside, today's episode is going to focus on some homebrew that I actually used before, which is the V5 Gargoyles by Tyler Rose, which we used on the one-shot I ran called Turn to Stone, which you can listen on the Lore by Night YouTube channel or by searching for Lore by Night Productions on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Now, just because I've used the homebrew, it does not mean that I liked it, but that is a question I'm hoping to answer. Does the homebrew do the Rockheads justice, and does this feel part of the V5 setting and mechanics? But before I do that, here are the rules for the Lore by Night book reviews. I will explore snippets of the lore, mechanics and rules found within the tome. I will look as to how they're presented and easily they're conveyed to new and old players alike. As this is a review written and presented by me, all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I've said, that is totally fine. It does not mean that you are right and I am wrong and vice versa. As of the recording of this episode, the V5 Gargoyles is only available as a 16-page PDF via the Storyteller's Vault and Drive-Thru RPG that serves as a mean of playing as the Gargoyle bloodline in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, be it in an unofficial homebrewed sense. As such, I cannot make the usual comments on what the book feels and look like. That said, my phone, which is where I stored the PDF, is currently a headrest for my Cavapoo Emma, so that is now forfeit, I suppose. As for the book itself, it is filled with intense amounts of clear white, with some stock photos which all tastefully feel that they belong within the V5 setting. That said, a couple of photos could have received a more artistic edit, they being the ones on pages 10 and 13. Regarding the one on page 13, it is odd to me that there is indeed a photo here, as that particular image is on a lore sheet and it goes against the traditional presentation scheme. With this in mind, it feels it was placed there just to fill white space that honestly did not need filling in my opinion. The torn scruffy letter that dominates page 7 is a neat touch. To me, it feels like an homage to many of the older World of Darkness books, particularly the ones produced by Onyx Path for the 20th anniversary edition line, only significantly easier to read, so A+ for that. With the mentioning of some older books, the book also has two instances of older artwork, one of the Gargoyle Pharaoh and another of Fastania, as illustrated from the Dark Ages book House of Tremere in all her thick glory. A couple of other Gargoyle illustrations would have been a nice touch. The attention to detail regarding the font face and colours is also appreciated. What I am not too fond of is the Batwing image that serves as the book's back cover. Not that I'm opposed to such photography, but it feels highly out of place, and because there is no proper back cover with a blurb and everything, it feels that part of the homebrew is missing, rather than it feeling concluded. You may have noticed I said styles when referring to the book's layout. Whilst it mainly draws the influence from the core book in its presentation of the clan and lore sheets, the ready-made characters, or pre-made characters as it is labelled in this book, takes influence from the design presented in the Onyx Path V5 books, as they are the only ones to present such ready-made characters in any official sense as of the writing of this podcast episode. It is a pleasant blend and works rather well, making it feel part of the V5 books in a presentation representational sense. When you open the book and read the credits and acknowledgements page, you are thrust straight into Gargoyle lore, from their inception, revolt, and what they may well be doing in the modern night, as this is non-canon material after all. What is presented in this page and a bit is a decent if clunky summary of their ye olde activities, omitting some of the more pivotal details, only to be mentioned later via a lore sheet, if only in brief passing. Most of the narrative here is focused on what happened after the revolt, fitting the Gargoyles into the Conclave of Prague and having them join the Anarchs, truly fed up of being ruled by anyone. To that end, surely it would make sense, narratively speaking, to have them as autarchus to be truly independent. What is the Anarchs but Camarilla Light to the Gargoyles? Also, many would elect to stay with the Cam and Tremere, as to be suddenly thrust into a world with too many decisions and responsibilities could potentially be overwhelming for some Gargoyles. This is especially true, as the Homebrew would imply they were dominated and manipulated into said positions and would simply not know any better. Many Tremere treated the Gargoyles wickedly, but not all of them. Following this are what myself and others would dub the main crunch of the book, which has your banes, compulsions, coterie merits, and discipline powers, the latter having its own title, which is one of two sections in the book that warrants its own proper title. The book does have a contents page, yet the book is really just one large chapter, if we get really pedantic with it. But I digress. The four archetypes are varied and clearly thought out, as are the take on the traditional Gargoyle clan weakness and adapting it into the V5 setting. The Gargoyle's weaker mental resistance takes the form of the Clan Bane, and the Sentinel Gargoyle cast/variance makes up the Compulsion, which shows some degree and understanding of the Gargoyle lore beyond the basic synopsis of their existence, as well as understanding 5th edition mechanics. That, or they have a good navigating skills of the White Wolf wiki. Knowing the author personally, I know, or at least hope, it is not the latter. Moving on to disciplines, we have what is perhaps one of the two biggest gripes for me. I am not a fan of how the disciplines have been handled, and it is purely down to a matter of taste and my growing frustrations of amalgams of V5. In the V5 Gargoyles homebrew, the Gargoyles have the disciplines Protean, Obfuscate, and Fortitude. I personally don't have any issues with Vice of Attack here being absent here, as it's always been a weird blend of Protean and Obfuscate anyway, which the powers Skin of the Chameleon and Flow Within the Mountain highlight perfectly, despite it and the other discipline power being locked behind some higher levels of Protean. Flow Within the Mountain does seem a fairly redundant power choice, given it's identical to Earthmeld, its prerequisite power, but allows one to move through stone and concrete also. Flow Within the Mountain was previously a level 5 power, where here it is a level 4 one. Whilst I can see the trail of thinking here, if I was going to adapt the sort of system the author was aiming for, I would have elected to have Bond with Terror instead, with the amalgam being Toughness or Flesh of Marble from Fortitude. I am also not fond of Flight being considered a discipline power, particularly when the sidebar on the same page treats Flight as more as a merit than an actual power, where a wingless or flightless gargoyle is ostracized by others of their kind. I saw the sidebar first before reading the discipline, which made me think that each dot in said merit would equate to wing size and gliding/flying capabilities. This to me made more sense than what was presented, which actually requires weight of the feather. It is also not that terribly practical of a discipline power, based on its description if a running start is needed for every gargoyle, which is something I omitted during Turn to Stone. That said, I do appreciate an attempt was made to streamline that particularly unique power of the Gargoyles. I say almost, as older fans would know certain Dominion powers allow the Barley to grow wings from demons. That, and the sidebar of this homebrew, the V5 Gargoyles, to present some interesting ways for the Kaitiv and Samnitsi to obtain wings, as well as regular Protean users. I would be surprised if many storytellers would allow this without a good explanation, but it makes it a lot more accessible for non-Gargoyle players, which is something I always appreciate. Next are two well-written lore sheets, one focusing on Pharaoh, the Nosferatu-hating gargoyle, blinded by faith, and Fastania, the Great Mother. The first of these lore sheets, the one centered around Pharaoh, is the most engaging and practical during a session than the latter in my opinion, for it's a tad easier to incorporate the various dots amongst any coterie member, unless you're Nosferatu then it sucks to be you I guess. Fastania seems to be more focused towards Gargoyle and Tremere players, which is totally fine but does present a few problems, other than its accessibility. Two of these powers focus on the creation of homunculi, the fleshy blood creatures of Vistania's creations that predate the gargoyles by some noticeable amount of time. Not only is there a question of humanity and stains that should come into consideration in their creation, but this homebrew could have provided rituals for players to use in order to create a host of these things, including other gargoyles. Whole plot points could have been centered around said rituals and the deep ethical boundaries of playing God that would involve creating such creatures. Finally, there is the section on pre-made characters that I mentioned previously. Here, you will find a grand total of 2 experienced gargoyle characters that I feel are more ST characters than they are player ones, given their discipline stats, but it is totally possible to use either of these 2 in your games as player characters. It was rather disappointing not to find more character concepts here, particularly as Onyx Path, for which this section is clearly stylized after, as mentioned previously, has composed books filled with ready-made characters, and what TTRPG fan and /or writer doesn't like making characters? It is an oddly underwhelming choice. Now, you could argue the point that perhaps as this is the first instance of the gargoyles in a V5 printed setting, the goal was not to overwhelm newer fans with too much lore and crunch. However, to have heard of the gargoyles in Vampire the Masquerade, you would have had at least the curiosity to poke a bit more in the history of the Tremere, so said newer fans do want lore in this instance. Regarding the mechanics of the homebrew, it does not take much sense to only provide content just for gargoyle fans. Storytellers may wish to pull existing Tremere focused ideas from this to use against and with their players, content that is related to the gargoyles, but this homebrew is clearly meant for players, which is somewhat of a misstep in my opinion. Even a short story at the beginning of the book that their system is terribly lacking would establish some stronger sense of setting for the Rockheads. This was the other gripe for me, particularly as this book leans more towards the Onyx Path Publishing way of presentation, a beautiful opportunity to inspire and terrify readers with morbid monstrosities that are the gargoyles, totally wasted and devoid of dark flavour. Instead, the homebrew presents the bare bones for players to insert their concepts and understanding of the lore, as if not wanting to offend newer readers with the unavoidable gruesome horrors that is their origin story. However, that is not to say that this approach or the V5 Gargoyles homebrew is bad, only mildly disappointing for my personal tastes. I love the Gargoyles, the lore, and the truly fucked up Tremere bullshit surrounding them, and it is something that I would have liked to have seen more of, to expand on the existing material and do something unique with it. As much as Gargoyle fans would testify against this, both they and the Tremere go hand in hand, or claw and hand, I should say. For those who don't thrive in World of Darkness lore like some deranged crack addict, the V5 Gargoyles is a shockingly short homebrew that does a good job in presenting the gargoyles in 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, with easy and approachable rules and setting to bring everyone's favourite thaumaturgical rejects to your table. If this is your first introduction to the gargoyles and their lore and small influence in the World of Darkness, as well as your first intro into Vampire the Masquerade, this homebrew is probably all that you're going to get, so it is fortunate that it is accessible in terms of price and presentation. For older fans and experienced STs, it might be best to do what I will do and just slot in the Scout, Sentinel and Warrior Gargoyles with their weaknesses and disciplines as and when you see fit. And for those of you who are new to the Lore by Night brand and the reviews I occasionally do, I do not do out of 10 scores because they are subjectively pointless. One person's 10 out of 10 is another's 3 out of 5 stars, which is another's minus 42 out of 100, so I shall rate this book Shepherd of the Flock out of 10, as that is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.